So in this video, we're going to look at the three main types of thermal energy transfer, which are conduction, convection, and radiation. And we're going to use the molecular theory of matter to explain how these come about. Conduction is thermal energy that transfers through direct contact. And so that can be between two objects touching each other, or one object being heated on one side of it and that thermal energy transferring throughout the object. The molecular theory relates to conduction because a higher temperature object means that the particles have a higher amount of kinetic energy. And those fast-moving particles collide with slower-moving particles, transferring some of that energy, and that passes through the substance. Some substances are better than others. Metals are very good conductors, whereas wood is a type of insulator. So you can see with this cooking skewer, if you were holding it with your hand, you would not feel the heat if you placed something in the fire. Things that affect conduction are density. So higher density objects tend to conduct heat better. Remember, conduction is the kinetic energy, the bumping into each other, molecules hitting each other. And so if they're closer together, if the object's more dense, then they'll be able to transfer that thermal energy a bit faster. And more importantly is the type of material. And so if the particles are able to move freely, then the object conducts better. Metals have a lot of free electrons in them. And these free electrons, as the particles are vibrating, are able to move a little bit more freely than, say, the electrons in wood, which don't move very well. And so metal conducts heat much better than wood and other insulators. Convection is when heat is transferred throughout a fluid. And so more simply put, warm fluid rises and the space that remains is filled with the colder fluid, and this creates a convection current. Now it's really important when you're explaining convection and how it happens, if you're describing it with the molecular theory, you want to have these key points here. And so when part of the fluid has a higher temperature, it gets more energy, and those particles move around. And if there's more space, that means the density has decreased. If the density is lower for the higher temperature substance, then that will rise within the fluid, and that will be replaced with the colder, higher density fluid. So when you're describing convection, it's very important. You must reference the density of the material. And that's the key feature of the molecular theory there. So once the density decreases, the warm fluid will rise and the cold fluid will enter. This animation here is showing it on a very simple scale, but you see in the center there, this flame is heating up that part of the substance. This could be air or water or any sort of fluid, and it rises through the middle and then cools down once it's away from the heat source and would sink down, and these would be convection currents. The last form we're going to talk about is radiation. And so all substances, all objects emit electromagnetic radiation. And this electromagnetic radiation has energy which can be transferred to another substance. Electromagnetic radiation is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now for a substance at room temperature, or the temperature of a person, let's say, that radiation is being somewhere emitted in the infrared part of the spectrum, so we don't see it. But when an object is heated, when temperature is increased of an object, actually the radiation that is emitted becomes higher energy. And so you might have seen this example where if you heat up metal enough, it enters the red-orangish part of the visible spectrum, so we can actually see the radiation coming off. But normally, objects emitting radiation, we don't see that in any way. So when radiation from one object reaches another, the energy is transferred to the particles, and this can increase their average kinetic energy, which increases the temperature. So this is how we connect molecular theory to the radiation thermal transfer. In summary, the three forms of thermal energy transfer are conduction, convection, radiation. They're shown in this image. We have a flame that's conducting up a metal rod. There are convection currents being created above the flame. And the reason that we feel a fire from a distance is because it's also emitting radiation in all directions. So most importantly, in molecular theory, conduction is related to the kinetic energy being transferred to the particles. Convection is the density of the fluid being less and therefore rising and bringing the warmer subfluid to the top and the colder fluid to the bottom. And then radiation is a property of all matter that it emits radiation, and at lower temperatures it emits in the infrared spectrum, and higher temperatures it emits in visible light.